There is a type of person society fears but never understands. They walk alone. They trust rarely. They observe everything. They don't chase attention. They don't beg for approval. And when they finally speak, people listen. You've heard them called toxic, cold, detached, dangerous. But what if their solitude isn't weakness? What if it's strategy? What if behind the silence lies a mind sharpened by betrayal, a heart protected by calculated distance, and a personality molded by the brutal truths of power? Tonight, we explore the psychology of the loner mind through the ruthless realism of Machiavellian philosophy. No one is born emotionally distant. Every loner has a backstory. A moment where trust collapsed, where loyalty betrayed, where vulnerability became a weapon used against them. And slowly, the realization emerges. The world respects strength more than kindness. People value usefulness more than authenticity. And loyalty is often temporary. This realization creates psychological armor. The loner stops oversharing, stops explaining, stops expecting. Silence becomes safety. Distance becomes control. This isn't emotional death. It's emotional evolution. Society thrives on predictability. It feels comfortable around people who conform. But loners disrupt that comfort. They don't seek validation. They don't reveal weaknesses easily. They don't participate in emotional theatrics. And this creates suspicion. People fear what they cannot read. And a loner is unreadable. So labels appear: toxic, arrogant, emotionless. But often these labels reflect insecurity more than reality, because a loner exposes an uncomfortable truth. You don't need a crowd to survive. You don't need approval to feel powerful. And independence threatens those dependent on validation. Machiavellian philosophy rejects naive optimism. It doesn't say people are evil, but it acknowledges that self-interest dominates human behavior. A loner understands this intuitively. They don't trust blindly. They observe patterns. Consistency matters more than promises. Actions matter more than words. And trust becomes a limited investment, given slowly, withdrawn quickly. This mindset isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition. The loner doesn't assume betrayal, but they prepare for it. And preparation creates emotional independence. Detachment is often misunderstood as lack of feeling, but true detachment isn't numbness, it's control over emotional reactions. A detached loner can think clearly under pressure, resist manipulation, avoid impulsive decisions, maintain composure during conflict. While others react emotionally, the loner analyzes, and analysis creates leverage, because emotional reactions reveal intentions, but emotional control hides them. In power dynamics, the one who reveals less controls more. Here's the paradox. Some behaviors labeled toxic are actually protective strategies. For example, emotional boundaries labeled as coldness, selective trust labeled as suspicion, self-prioritization labeled as selfishness, silence labeled as arrogance, but context matters. True toxicity harms others for pleasure. Strategic detachment protects oneself from harm. A loner isn't necessarily toxic. They are cautious, and caution is the result of experience. Social people talk, loners watch, and observation reveals hidden dynamics: who envies, who manipulates, who pretends, who performs kindness. The loner becomes a silent analyst of human behavior. They notice micro-expressions, tone shifts, energy changes, and this awareness creates psychological foresight. While others get blindsided by betrayal, the loner often sees it coming. Silence creates mystery. Mystery creates perception. Perception creates power. When you talk less, people project more. They assume intelligence. They assume depth. They assume strength. And assumptions shape social hierarchy. The loner doesn't chase dominance, but their presence often commands it. Because unpredictability is intimidating. There is a crucial distinction. Loneliness is emotional emptiness. Solitude is intentional separation. A toxic loner suffers loneliness. A strategic loner chooses solitude. Solitude becomes a laboratory for self-reflection. It allows identity formation, emotional processing, intellectual growth, psychological independence. And independence is the foundation of authentic power. But there is a shadow. Excessive detachment can evolve into emotional isolation. Caution can become paranoia. Independence can become distrust of everyone. And this is where the loner risks becoming truly toxic. Because humans still need connection. Even the strongest minds need emotional anchors. Power without connection becomes emptiness. Control without vulnerability becomes loneliness. Balance is essential. The loner's path is slower, but deeper. They spend years understanding themselves, years observing others, years building resilience quietly. And this creates emotional endurance, psychological independence, strategic thinking, self-sufficiency. While others rely on external validation, the loner builds internal stability. And internal stability is unshakable. There is something unsettling about a calm person who has suffered deeply. They don't react loudly. They don't seek revenge publicly. They don't display emotional chaos, but their calm carries weight. It signals experience. It signals resilience. It signals that they have survived battles unseen, and that quiet strength commands respect. The loner teaches powerful truths. Checkmark. Not everyone is meant to stay. Checkmark. Boundaries are self-respect. Checkmark. Silence is emotional intelligence. Checkmark. Independence is freedom. Checkmark. Observation is awareness. These lessons aren't anti-social. They are pro-self. The greatest power isn't domination. It's self-mastery. And the loner's journey often leads there. They confront their fears alone, face their insecurities alone, process their pain alone. And through that solitude, they develop an identity not shaped by others. Self-mastery creates presence. Presence creates influence. Influence creates power. The greatest power isn't domination, it's self-mastery. And the loner's journey often leads there. They confront their fears alone, face their insecurities alone, process their pain alone. And through that solitude, they develop an identity not shaped by others. Self-mastery creates presence. Presence creates influence. Influence creates power. A loner rarely shows their true emotional landscape, not because they are fake, but because authenticity once cost them deeply. So they develop masks, not theatrical masks, but behavioral ones. The calm mask in chaos, the humorous mask in pain, the indifferent mask in betrayal, the confident mask in insecurity. This masking isn't deception, it's psychological survival. A Machiavellian loner understands something crucial. Emotions displayed publicly become tools others can use privately. So they filter expression, not to manipulate, but to avoid being manipulated. And over time, the mask becomes second nature. A loner rarely shows their true emotional landscape, not because they are fake, but because authenticity once cost them deeply. So they develop masks, not theatrical masks, but behavioral ones. The calm mask in chaos, the humorous mask in pain, the indifferent mask in betrayal, the confident mask in insecurity. This masking isn't deception, it's psychological survival. A Machiavellian loner understands something crucial. Emotions displayed publicly become tools others can use privately. So they filter expression, not to manipulate, but to avoid being manipulated. And over time, the mask becomes second nature. While others chase experiences, loners often chase understanding. They read people like books, not in obvious ways, but through subtle behavioral clues. How someone speaks about absent people, how they react to others' success, how they behave when powerless, how they treat those who offer no benefit. These patterns reveal character more than words, and the loner becomes a quiet psychologist. They don't confront hypocrisy loudly. They simply adjust distance silently. One of the loner's greatest strengths is emotional self-sufficiency. They learn to self-soothe pain, process rejection internally, generate motivation without applause, build confidence without external praise. This independence doesn't mean they don't feel pain. It means pain doesn't control them. And emotional independence disrupts manipulation, because manipulation thrives on emotional dependency. When you don't need validation, you cannot be easily controlled. Distance is not always avoidance. Sometimes it is clarity. The loner uses distance to observe dynamics objectively, protect emotional boundaries, regain psychological balance, evaluate intentions. Distance reveals truths, proximity hides. You see patterns, you notice inconsistencies, you regain perspective, and perspective dismantles illusions. Contrary to stereotypes, many loners don't pursue revenge, not because they forgive easily, but because they detach efficiently. They understand a deeper Machiavellian principle. Indifference is often more powerful than retaliation. Revenge ties you emotionally to the offender. Indifference frees you psychologically. So instead of confrontation, they withdraw access. And access is the loner's greatest currency. Loner minds are often deeply empathetic, but silently so, because they understand pain intimately. They recognize loneliness in others. They notice emotional suffering hidden behind smiles. They detect insecurity masked by arrogance. But their empathy is private. They don't perform compassion publicly. They express it subtly, selectively. And this creates misunderstood depth. People assume detachment, while beneath lies quiet emotional intelligence. Unpredictability triggers anxiety, and loners are unpredictable because they don't follow social scripts. They may remain silent when expected to react, remain calm when expected to explode, withdraw when expected to chase. This breaks expectations, and broken expectations create psychological discomfort. But unpredictability also creates leverage, because those who cannot predict you cannot easily manipulate you. Solitude fosters introspection. Introspection fosters self-awareness. Self-awareness fosters wisdom. Loner minds often develop deep inner dialogues. They question their motivations, their fears, their identity, their purpose. This internal conversation sharpens perception. While noise distracts, silence clarifies. And clarity is the foundation of strategic thinking. But observation has a cost. When you see through facades, you struggle to enjoy illusions. You notice manipulation. You notice pretenses. You notice shallow connections. And awareness creates emotional fatigue. The loner sometimes longs for ignorance because ignorance simplifies relationships. But once perception sharpens, it cannot easily dull again. Trust for a loner is not binary. It exists on layers. Layer 1, social trust, casual interaction. Layer 2, personal trust, shared experiences. Layer 3, emotional trust, vulnerability. Layer 4, existential trust, deep loyalty. Few people reach the deeper layers, not due to arrogance, but due to careful evaluation. Trust is not granted. It is built through consistency over time. And this makes betrayal rare, but impactful. The loner isn't emotionless. They simply process emotions privately. Their tears fall in silence. Their fears remain unspoken. Their healing happens unseen. And this creates a misconception. People believe visible emotion equals depth, but invisible emotion often runs deeper. A quiet ocean hides powerful currents. Self-control is the loner's core strength. They learn to pause before reacting, think before trusting, observe before committing. This pause creates psychological advantage because most conflicts escalate through impulsive emotion, but the loner's delay disrupts escalation, and calm thinking produces strategic responses. Perhaps the loner's deepest struggle is paradoxical. They desire connection, but fear vulnerability. They crave understanding, but distrust intentions. They want companionship, but protect independence. This internal conflict creates emotional complexity, and navigating this tension becomes a lifelong journey. The loner eventually realizes external validation is temporary. Internal validation is sustainable. So they build identity independent of applause. They become their own support system, their own motivator, their own reassurance. And self-validation creates psychological freedom because approval becomes optional, not necessary. The loner's journey evolves through stages. 1. Pain-driven isolation. 2. Defensive detachment. 3. Observational awareness. 4. Emotional independence. 5. Strategic solitude. 6. Balanced connection. Not all loners reach the final stage. Some remain trapped in defensive isolation. But growth transforms solitude from protection into empowerment. To walk alone is not always to be lost. Sometimes it is to rediscover yourself without noise, to understand people without illusion, to build identity without imitation. The loner toxic mind is not inherently dark. It is shaped by experience, sharpened by awareness, and guided by caution. But within that darkness lies clarity. Within that silence lies strength. Within that distance lies freedom. And perhaps the greatest Machiavellian truth is this: those who master solitude can choose connection without fear. Because when you are complete alone, you never accept less than authentic togetherness. To walk alone is not always to be lost. Sometimes it is to rediscover yourself without noise, to understand people without illusion, to build identity without imitation. The loner toxic mind is not inherently dark. It is shaped by experience, sharpened by awareness, and guided by caution. But within that darkness lies clarity. Within that silence lies strength. Within that distance lies freedom. And perhaps the greatest Machiavellian truth is this: those who master solitude can choose connection without fear. Because when you are complete alone, you never accept less than authentic togetherness.